Hey, I'm Gillett, and this is the Power of Women podcast. We're a platform that showcases and celebrates the strength, resilience, and achievement of women from all walks of life. In each episode, I pose questions to my guests to peel away the layers to reveal the knowledge, experiences, and the wisdom that shapes their narrative. So if you're feeling unseen, unheard, or simply looking for inspiration, then the Power of Women podcast is a great place to join the conversation. My guest today is joining me all the way from Mexico City. She's an ambitious woman who has smashed glass ceilings and collected accolades in a male dominated industry. Behind the scenes, though, she was overworked, unfulfilled, and following rules that simply did not align with her values. And today, she believes there is a better way to work. Melina Cordero, welcome to the Power of Women podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be in this space.
Brilliant. Melina, where did you grow up?
I grew up actually just outside Washington, D.C., in the USA. So that's where I grew up. Sort of born in D.C., grew up around there, and have hopped around a lot since.
Fantastic. So tell me, what are the richest experiences that you've taken away from your childhood?
I think looking back, hindsight's 2020, right? And I think that
Mm,
the richest experience in my childhood was the hardest at the time, which was getting yanked out of where I was living. So I mentioned I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., had all my friends. And right, not even at the start of the school year, in the middle of the school year in seventh grade, when no one is at their best, we had to move. We had to move states. And it was the wrong time, the wrong place. It was all the things. And it was really, really hard for me, especially, imagine you're 13 years old, no one's happy. So
mm,
it was a really, really hard adjustment for me to make. But looking back, I am so appreciative of that because I feel like I've been able to handle change and adapt all my life to new places, new situations, in part because I had that experience at such a young age. So not exactly a traumatic experience, but in your 13-year-old brain, it felt pretty traumatic at the time.
yeah. And it's interesting because I've spoken to a number of specialists in this sort of area on the podcast. And the fact that, the experiences that shape us in the first 7 years of our lives, our generation seem to have seriously learnt resilience in their childhood from what, as you say, might not seem to be such significant events. However, they've played a rather significant role in shaping who we've become.
Absolutely. And I owe a lot as well to having parents who were very supportive, who were understanding, who allowed me to feel upset about a move that, they didn't have full control of either. And I think the other most important thing that I learned from my family was never forget to laugh. In
Fantastic.
every situation, in every hardship, there's always something we can find funny, we can giggle about. And even in the work I do now, which can be quite tough at times, I find ways to laugh. So that was
Yeah.
another lesson from my childhood.
Yeah. Brilliant. So, Melina, you spent a decade sprinting between airports and boardrooms and conference stages. Tell me about your career prior to launching your business.
Wow, it feels like a century ago. It wasn't that long ago. And so
Well, it
my
was
career
last
prior
century.
to in conceptually it was a century ago. It was not an actual century ago. But I joke that my career prior to branching off on my own was me falling up the corporate ladder. Like it was never my intention. I didn't have family that was in sort of the office or corporate space. I didn't come from that. I didn't really know what that was. But I was a student from a young age who did all the right things, got all the grades, went to the best schools, did all my homework, showed up to every course, every class. And so I was on that track that I'm sure a lot of women can relate to. And that transferred into my career. And I ended up sort of accidentally getting these jobs. I ended up in commercial real estate, in retail specifically. And I worked for a tech company and I worked in consumer market research. And then I landed, I was maybe 28 years old when I landed this very high level global director position at the largest commercial real estate company in the world,
With
right?
no other women
So
around you.
with no other women around me. And so I was in that role and I was doing all the things because that's what I'd always been on autopilot to do was achieve, succeed, and keep going and keep climbing. And I did, and I kept going and I kept going. But it was interesting because the further I advanced, the more sort of on paper success I had, the less aligned it all felt. And it was this really tough experience to feel like, okay, I keep advancing. I'm doing all the things that everyone says you're supposed to do. And I'm doing all the things that everyone says is wow, impressive, amazing, and at such a young age. And yet each step forward in that direction, I felt this disconnect of something doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like me. This doesn't feel aligned. And so it was this weird double feeling of increasing success, but also like I was failing something
Mm,
in me
mm.
and really failing myself in a way. That
So
was an
how did,
interesting experience.
sorry, so I was going to say, so how did the sector in which you work influence the leadership style that you developed in that space?
So it's really interesting to think about now that I work so much in leadership and studying how leadership is developed and what great leadership is, because as you mentioned, I was in male dominated space. And I would say not only was it primarily male around me, I was one of the only women at my level. It was also a very particular environment. So everyone was mostly coming from a sales background, so mostly brokers, real estate brokers. So they had a certain approach to working and decision making.
Bolshy,
That was,
a lot of
yeah,
bravado, I guess.
some would say sharp like, right? It was a very aggressive, very competitive environment. And I didn't come from that world. I actually came from research and data and analysis. So I didn't have the same background as most of the people I was leading. And I would also say it was really tough because I didn't have any other models that looked like me, that thought like me, that had a similar background. So most of the leaders who were around me and above me were older white men with a very different background, like I mentioned, more sales. And I was coming in and I was asking different kinds of questions and I was having different kinds of instincts. And I was saying, well, why don't we do it this way? And at the same time, it was tough because I was constantly doubting myself because no one else was doing it this way. Everyone else was doing it this way. So I didn't have proof that my instincts and my thoughts were the right way. And
Mm,
so it was constantly balancing when you are the only X in the room or on the Zoom, as I talk about, there's a constant balancing of needing and wanting to fit in, but also needing and wanting to innovate and do things
mm,
differently. So it was a really interesting leadership experience. And so I think there was opportunity in the fact that I was different. And I was told that. I was told, you're here because we need your voice, we need your perspective. And at the same time, that's not easy to assert and navigate when you're the only one with that voice and perspective.
yeah. So you've said when we spoke prior to today's recording that you've got a way of communicating with men without excluding them, and I think that's something we're really at risk of doing in so many settings today as we're trying to step forward. Talk me through your way of communicating. How do you do that without excluding the guys in the room?
It was really interesting because, as I mentioned, I was oftentimes the only woman in the room or in the Zoom or at the client dinner, right? And I could feel, and I'm sure a lot of women who are in a similar situation can relate to this. I could feel that sometimes the men felt uncomfortable that I was there. Maybe they couldn't have the same conversations they would normally have. Maybe they were feeling, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't want to, for example, sometimes they wouldn't invite me to coffee in the way that they would invite a male in my position because it was kind of awkward or uncomfortable. So I had always had to be hyper aware of that and do what I could to make them comfortable, right? And so that's something that a lot of women in similar positions will talk about. And so there's need to make them comfortable. I think the other thing that I developed was particular, maybe not so much to men, but to salespeople who in many industries tend to be mostly male. Uh, and there's a need to communicate in a way that is direct, that is engaging. Salespeople have very short attention spans.
Mm.
And in a way, when you are a salesperson, when you make your living off of deals or transactions, every minute is money. And so when you're communicating with them, especially when it's complex information, it needs to be efficient and it needs to be engaging in a way that you're communicating to them, this is worth your time. And
Yeah.
this is worth your time, your energy, and your focus. So I think that my communication style was shaped very much by who I was working with and who I was communicating with. My key role was, especially in my research world, taking complex information, distilling it down into very simple, easy to understand information that also had a point. I always used to tell my team, if you're going to present data, if you're going to present information, you also need to make sure you cover the so what. Why does this matter? What does this mean? So that has very much impacted my communication.
Mm. So you've really worked out how to talk to that room and create that sense of inclusion. What if you were to pass on, one salient piece of advice to a female in a similar situation? What would you say would be the one communication strategy you'd suggest she adopts?
I would say listen, right? Listening is always really important. And also assert, assert when you have a different idea, when you think differently. And the advice I give so many women, especially ones who are rising up, who may be younger than me, is if you are in a space where you are one of the only ones who looks like you, sounds like you, thinks like you, get yourself some support. So if in your place of work or in your industry, you don't have that support, those models, that peer group, go get it. Whether it's joining a women's group, whether it's finding a mentor in your industry, whether it's having someone, an executive coach, someone who can be your balance. Because when you are in these spaces, you're going to be constantly getting the message, you don't fit in, you don't fit in, you don't fit in. Your ideas are different, your ideas are different, your ideas are different. And you need to counterbalance that with the feedback that tells you, no, these are great ideas. This is innovative. Keep going.
And that in itself is a great idea. So thank you for that. So you were personally experiencing and observing in the workplace something that prompted a career change in 2021. What was that?
Yes, I think that 2020, 2021 prompted a lot of changes for a lot of people
Sure
across the
did.
entire world.
Sure did.
For me, I mentioned that as I had been rising, the closer I got to the top, and I got pretty close. I could see it, I could touch it, I could see what it would look like and feel like to be doing that. Um, I thought this wasn't for me. Something felt off. It didn't feel right, and I was seeing more and more of the, what I would call unfairness, things that didn't make sense to me, things, even from a strategy operations level, like didn't seem efficient. Why are we doing it this way? So I was starting to question a lot of things. As I got closer to the decision making spot, it became clear to me of like, I don't think this is the right way to do things. And then when 2020 hit, for all of us, I think it was a big wake up moment for me. I went from running around, I was constantly on the road. I was home maybe 1 or 2 days a week, and I was always on the road. And all of a sudden I was grounded and I started to notice things that I hadn't really noticed before. And I was seeing how the pandemic was impacting my female colleagues and friends and clients so much more than my male colleagues and clients.
Is that
And it's such
right?
a,
The women were more
yeah,
severely impacted. Yeah. In what way?
yeah, yeah. There were a lot of women in caregiving roles that obviously took on, statistically, we know this, a lot more burden. Suddenly, they weren't just corporate executives. They
They were
were corporate executives
teachers.
and kindergarten teachers and
Mm.
babysitters and, and the list goes on. There was a really, it may seem like a silly example, but it really impacted me was we would get on these Zooms And I always noticed that the men would show up with baseball caps and they hadn't shaved in 5 days and they were in t-shirts. But the women always showed up super polished,
Yeah, isn't that
hair done,
interesting?
makeup, clean, everything. And it really bothered me because I thought, you know what? We don't have a choice. Because if
Mm,
we showed up that way, we would be judged so much more harshly. And that on top of the caregiving and the kindergarten teaching and the cooking and the blah, 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 blah that we know women had to do. And they were having to do all this extra work, right? So that really struck a chord with me. And I was having conversations. I think we were all having conversations over that time period that were much more intimate than conversations we had pre-pandemic. Suddenly we
mm,
were in each other's homes. Our
mm.
Zoom window showed everything. Kids were crawling across the screen. Dogs were barking. People
Yeah.
were sharing grief. There were a lot
Mm,
more emotions being shared, and I saw a lot more, and I also saw a lot more suffering. A lot of people unhappy with work,
mm,
and I saw that at the same time, and especially in the U.S., and especially in Washington D.C., where I was living at the time. Black Lives Matter and these conversations about social and racial justice and equity were really coming to the fore, right, as they needed to, and as they continue to be important. What I saw then, though, was companies responding in ways that I thought, wow, that's great. Okay, there's attention, but this is never going to work.
mm,
I was looking at these responses that I think in many cases were well intentioned, but I thought that, this memo with a graphic design letterhead is not enough. This town hall where maybe people pose a question and there's an answer and we never talk about it again is not enough. And that really struck a chord with me, and everything seems to come together for me. And I thought, as you mentioned before, there's a much better way to do this. People are unhappy. There's a need for more discussion and conversation and action around justice, equity, in the workplace and outside the workplace, but especially in the workplace. And we need new ideas and we need better innovation. We need
mm,
innovation around this. And the other thing that I saw happening that I knew in my gut and it turned out to be true, I was like, the world is fundamentally changed. After however
mm,
we get out of this pandemic,
mm.
we're not going to be the same. The world is not going to be the same, and work is not going to be the same.
When did you
And
realize
work,
that? Because I mean, that's absolutely proven to be the case. But how soon into all of this experiment that we found ourselves lobbed into did you realize that?
I think I realized it as we started to come out of it.
Mm,
I think while we were in it, we were also focused on survival mode and just getting through, getting through, getting through until we started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And as we started to see the light at the end of the tunnel and we started to come out of it, what struck me was that so many companies and leaders were wanting to immediately go back to the way things were.
mm,
Okay, this nightmare is over, and now we can go back to everyone back in the office and everyone do this. And I was like, no, 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 no. No, 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 we
mm,
can't go back to how it was. Like things are different now. And we
mm,
started to see the resistance and people saying, I'm sorry, I've been working remotely very efficiently for 18 months, 2 years. I don't want to go back to the office.
mm,
That's 2 hours of my day commuting and gas money and XYZ and time away from my children that I don't need to do anymore. And
mm.
so I think seeing that desire from so many leaders to just go back to the way things were really struck a chord with me because it told me that they were not ready to face
Yeah.
the changes that were coming.
And what we're finding in Australia, and it's the conversation that's in every boardroom at the moment, is the rate of burnout is higher than it's ever been before. Is that the same in the US? I'd suspect it is.
Absolutely. I've done a lot of work on burnout with teams and organizations and how do you identify it? How do you address it? How do you prevent it? Burnout is a huge topic. We have record low rates of employee engagement. We have record high rates of burnout and workplace related stress. And what's really interesting and important to recognize around burnout and stress, the big B topic, is it affects women and people of color in the US more than anyone else.
Mm,
So this is not just a mental health and wellness issue. This is an equity and justice and inclusion issue. And it is very clearly and apparently a workplace profit and productivity issue.
Mm.
As much as we want to put it in this little box called wellness and tell people to meditate for 5 minutes a day and take your breathers and go walk outside, get in nature, this is much bigger than that. And this is, I think, in a matter of time, going to be really apparent to companies that this is affecting the profit and revenue.
Yeah. So coming up, we're going to explore why Melina left her job to make yours better. So Melina, you believe there is a better way to work. Tell us about that.
I mean, I think everyone can agree there's a better way to work, and in every sense, right? And so when I really use that and lean into that as my mission statement, right? Because that is at the core of what I do. I wake up every day because I think there's a better way to work. Everything I do is because I think there's a better way to work. And it was inspired first by seeing how unhappy so many people were, not just women. I mean, women, especially people of color, everyone is feeling exhausted. Everyone is feeling a little bit of an existential crisis, especially coming out of the pandemic. Not everyone, but what I was seeing was a lot of people disillusioned, unhappy, stressed out, and also feeling very trapped. And so that I think I remember hearing this quote or someone telling me years ago that the thing that hurts your heart the most is the thing that your life mission is to address or try and solve. I'm butchering the wording on that, but it was something like pay attention to what pulls at your heartstrings because that's where your drive can and should be. And so for me, it was seeing that level of unhappiness around so many people, and especially women, that has driven me to focus on finding a better way to work because there are two solutions. One is helping us as individuals get out of bad situations, get out of bad workplaces, get away from under bad bosses, right? And find better situations and the work environments that are best for us. But I think there's another angle and there's another part of the solution that's ignored, which is make our organizations better workplaces, help our organizations create better work environments for people. And so for me, for all the reasons we talked about coming out of the pandemic, and I was seeing this huge opportunity of everything about the way that we work is changing. How we work, where we work, when we work, why people work is fundamentally shifted. Now is a golden opportunity to come into organizations and say, hey, let's change things and make it better.
Yeah, I love
So
that
that's what it
because your
means to
first
me.
example was, it's not working. I'm going to get the hell out of there. Where this, which is kind of what I call Western medicine, and the second one is what I'd probably call leaning into Eastern medicine. Is let's fix it so it doesn't cause those issues in the first place.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of both, right? We saw, at least in the US, the what they called the Great Resignation. A lot of people quitting, a lot of people leaving jobs, a lot of people starting businesses, branching off on their own. Um, Great Resignation, and then back in 2021 or 2022, there was a big McKinsey report, Women in the Workplace, that showed these incredible stats that actually women were leaving more than anyone else. And not just any women, senior level women. And I fit the profile of exactly who they were talking about in
Yeah,
that.
ditto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is a big deal. And I think that workplaces don't have the monopoly as much anymore on employment. We saw, at least in the US, a huge rise in new business formation because people are saying, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not working for a company. I'm not working under these rules. I'm not working under these conditions. There is an internet, there is social media, there is LinkedIn, there is Fiverr, there is
I
a
can hang up
plethora
a
of
shingle.
platforms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So organizations, if they want to keep and retain people, are going to need to start paying attention.
Yeah, absolutely. So I understand one of your favorite projects is Women on Work. What are some of the findings out of that project, Melina?
It is one of my favorite projects. And just to give a little context to it, when I left the workplace, the first thing that I did was I started this project because I knew my experience and I knew the experience of many of my friends and colleagues, but I wanted to really understand a diversity of women's experiences in different workplaces to be able to create the solutions for workplaces and organizations that would actually work. And so I opened up my Zoom doors basically, and I said, look, if you're a woman in the workplace and you want to share your story, call me. And I started having these hour long, oftentimes they went longer, conversations with women to tell me, what had their experience been in the workplace? What challenges have they faced? What were the hardest things? What were their biggest doubts? And also, what were the things that helps them, that supported them through their career? And my favorite question was, and I incorporate into a lot of the work that I do now, which I call the magic wand question, which is if you had a magic wand and you could change anything about work, place, or your organization, what would you do? And it was almost this beautiful, unintended way of crowdsourcing innovative ideas for how to change the way. And that has been a beautiful project for me because I selfishly get to connect with amazing women all over the world.
Yeah.
And hear their stories.
Yeah. Wow. And was there a common thread in what was the magic wand? And I know you're the data queen, so I'm sure you're
And the
putting
data
all of this
queen.
into buckets of insights and weaving that into your work. But I'd be interested in what some of those insights were.
There were some incredible insights. I would say that the three main things that came out of that project for me is a big takeaway. And when I talk about what I learned from it, I always cite these three. The first that struck me was that a lot of women feel alone in their struggles. Um, but nearly every woman I talked to had the same struggles. So there's this shared experience that people don't know is shared. And so a lot of women are suffering in silence, in part because a lot of times we blame ourselves. So I mentioned, I think earlier, if I felt stressed at work when I was in my corporate leadership position, if I felt stressed at work, I immediately blamed myself and said, well, it's because I don't know how to handle my email inbox, or it's because I take things too personally, or it's because XYZ. It wasn't the structural issues that they had asked me to do two full-time roles at the same time during the pandemic, or that I was being called in to participate in every single DEI related webinar, even though my job had nothing to do with that, right? So that is one item, is that a lot of women are
Dangers
suffering
of
under the same
being
things.
capable, Melina.
Or in the case that I think a lot of women experience this, when you are the only woman in the room and all of a sudden your company wants to focus on DEI and inclusion, suddenly you're being called in to represent that DEI and inclusion when it's just more work for you, and you're not necessarily contributing, you're just face. So that was one. The second insight was very similar to what I had shared with you, my experience of struggling with the fact that there were very few, if any, leaders who looked like me, who could model an alternative style leadership. And so when you are leading and everyone else looks the same but different from you, it's hard because you're questioning your gut all the time. And so feeling a lack of models, and this is why representation matters so much, and why support groups, coaching groups, those kinds of mastermind groups are really, really helpful. Go get your bench of support. And then the third one is that women do have to work more. They really do. There's this great example, not just the data that tells us that women take on more caregiving and sort of home related tasks. Like we know statistically that's the case. Even when the woman earns more than their partner. But there's this area of non-promotable tasks, which I find fascinating. And I don't know if that concept or that term has hit in other continents.
No, I haven't really heard it. That's interesting. So that's just non-promotable tasks.
Non-promotable tasks are all of the tasks that we are oftentimes either we volunteer for, or we're voluntold to do. Someone strongly suggests we do it or volunteers us to do it, which are a lot of times, workplace culture, team building tasks like remembering everyone's birthdays, going out and getting the cupcakes for the teammate, organizing the lunch or the dinner for the team or the holiday party.
Right. You are so right. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people are nodding. Those are called non-promotable tasks, and they're called that because you are not getting any recognition for it, even though these are tasks that contribute to culture, contribute to team building, contribute to employee engagement, have real tangible value. They're not recognized in your job description. Exactly. It's an integral. They are not recognized in your performance reviews. They are not calculated in your bonus, and you're not getting paid for them. And what's interesting is the research on non-promotable tasks shows that women don't get recognized for them. And women are primarily the ones taking on these tasks in the workplace. And men, in the rare instances that they do a non-promotable task, like the ones I mentioned, they are so praised for it. It's kind of like the dad that goes to the bus stop. I always joke when I was growing up, my dad was the one that would take us to the bus stops because he had a more flexible schedule. He's a professor, and so his class schedules were different than my mother, who had a more traditional 9 to 5. And he was usually the only dad at the bus stop. And all the other moms were like, oh my goodness, you have the best father. And I did have the best father. He's incredible. But the point is that men tend to get recognized for these gestures much more than women, because it's seen as, well, women just have a natural instinct to care about each other.
Isn't it interesting that the way in which that is, the tasks are adopted by the women, and the way in which it is viewed, if men take that, is exactly the same in the workplace as it is in the family home. It's running in parallel.
Exactly. You can see so many parallels. And because it's the same, we're all humans, and a lot of, as much as we want to separate work and home or work and life, it is so blended. We are the same humans. We're at home as we are at work. Even we may put some performances on or some hats or a suit, but we're the same people. And so it makes sense. But I think, one of the key takeaways when I was asking women, what would you want in the workplace? One of the number one things that women kept telling me over and over in those conversations was, I just want to be able to do my job. Like, I want to be able to do my job and contribute my value without having to deal with the pushback, without having to deal with the unfairness, without having to deal with the questioning and the interrupting and the men taking credibility for my work. If I could just do my job, imagine the things I could achieve. But I spend 20 to 30% of my time dealing with those obstacles that I shouldn't have to deal with.
Yeah.
And that is the frustration that a lot of women experience.
Yeah, and businesses haven't worked out what a drain on productivity that really is.
Well, they're starting to see the drain on talent because they're losing women, they're having trouble retaining women, and they're going to suffer for it.
Hence the spike in female entrepreneurs appearing around the world. So, yeah.
Yes. Two cases in point right here, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, Melina, you've developed a new digital platform designed to drive inclusion, innovation, and leadership in organizations. What's the platform?
I am super excited about this. The platform is called P20, P20 Workplace. And P20 stands for Post 2020. And that is really what my company and everything I do is built around, this idea that we need post 2020 tools and ideas for a post 2020 world in our workplaces. It's as simple as that.
Yeah,
and
great.
So in all the work that I've been doing, in my 10 plus years as a corporate employee in various environments, and now in almost 4 years working in DEI and leadership and workplace culture, one of the number one thing that I saw happening was people feeling like they didn't know what to do. What we have is a huge percentage of our employee base and leaders who in my view, want to do better, get the importance of this work, get the importance of great leadership, great people management, inclusive environments. And the majority of people have no clue how to do it.
Mm.
And part of that is because, as I mentioned, what I saw and what prompted me to leave the corporate environment was that the tools that we were being given were not helping. And so, we do these DEI workshops or we do these leadership summits and we have these aha moments, but then we walk away and we're not really sure how to apply anything.
Mm.
And so what we needed, in my view, what we need is continual support and continual learning on how to apply these ideas and how to be an inclusive colleague, how to be an inclusive leader, how to be innovative. And so the P20 Workplace platform is built for that. And so it's a what I describe it as the Netflix of DEI and leadership learning. And it's multimedia learning modules that are built to cover the topics that actually matter in the post 2020 workplace. How do you manage a hybrid team? How do you run an inclusive meeting? How do you deliver an effective presentation in a hybrid or remote environment or in an in-person environment? These are the topics that aren't covered in most of the DEI and leadership conversations and learning that we have. And I wanted to be able to give people the learning and resources that I wish I'd had when I was.
Terrific.
And leaders need support. I have to recognize that leaders, anybody who's a people manager or leader in an organization, knows that we have had to navigate massive changes, kind of winging it since 2020. And it's extremely difficult, and it's time to support leaders in doing better.
So I know the list is going to be pretty long, but what are some of the key challenges that present if you're trying to ground a business in a DEI culture?
Discomfort, fear, I think is number one. There's a lot of fear of doing it wrong, getting it wrong, saying the wrong thing. It feels overwhelming. I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. So that's the number one thing that I think holds a lot of individuals and organizations back from action. And so a lot of my work and my approach is creating a safe and comfortable space. I'm also sending the point home that this is a messy space. We're going to get it wrong. I get it wrong. I say the wrong thing sometimes. You're going to say the wrong thing. It's okay. How do we create an environment where it's okay to stumble and get back up again and keep going? Because it's absolutely possible. So I'd say number one, to answer your question, is the discomfort. Number two, I think, is a lack of understanding really what the point of this work is. There's a lot of what's called, zero sum mentality where people think, oh, well, if we create opportunities for these folks, it means we have to take away from that. And not at all. So I spent a lot of time explaining how DEI and leadership work doesn't shift the pieces of the pie. It grows the pie. It grows the pie so we can have more pieces,
Hence
right?
the word
So people
inclusion.
hence the word inclusion. And then the third challenge, big obstacle I see with organizations actually making progress with DEI is what I mentioned, is a lack of tools and resources. So what I see 8 times out of 10 with organizations is great intentions, but not really sure how to do it, what to do. There's a lot of focus on why DEI is important, but not enough conversation and focus on how to implement it. And so that's where a lot of my work focuses. And what the P20 workplace platform does is it equips.
Yeah.
So we're not just supporting and teaching, we're equipping. And
Brilliant.
that's what I think is going to help a lot of companies move forward.
Well, congratulations. It sounds like a brilliant platform and a great career path, leveraging loads and loads of experience, Melina. So well done.
Thank you.
So, on a personal level, if you were to pay forward all the knowledge and wisdom and experience that you've amassed over time, what would it be that you'd pass on to somebody listening to Power of Women today?
A lot of things I would say, but I think that the main thing I would say is don't ever feel trapped. Don't be afraid to take a leap and know that almost always you have way more options than you realize.
Mm.
I spent a lot of time feeling trapped, feeling like I didn't have other options. I had to stick with this career. I'd gotten so far. How could I leave it? And I have a lot of conversations with women, feeling trapped either for financial reasons, um, for their family not supporting them, for a whole host of reasons. But I would say don't be afraid to take a bold step in another direction. That doesn't necessarily have to mean quit your job. That doesn't necessarily have to mean start a new business, but that could mean proposing a really different idea in a meeting. It
Yeah.
could mean, you know, asking for a completely different role in your company, right? It doesn't need to be a huge drastic shift, but don't be afraid to do things differently is my main point. Because as I've mentioned a couple times in this conversation, one of the biggest challenges that I face and that women face as leaders in the workplace is a lack of models for doing things differently. So if I can pay it forward and sort of encourage every woman listening on this call, don't be afraid to do something different, because you are going to pave the way for all the other women around you and coming up behind you. And you're giving them permission to change the way that we work and change the way that we do.
Yeah.
And that is what we need, because
And
we're
that
not
is
going to get
gold.
anywhere.
Yeah, that's gold. Thank you, Melina, because that's what the whole proposition of Power of Women is about, is being able to inform women through storytelling and sharing ideas and knowledge and the wisdom, and you've got it in spades. So thank you. It's brilliant.
Well, thank you.
So if somebody's looking to find you, what's the name of your business and how do they reach out to you, Melina?
Yeah, I'd say the three simplest ways are LinkedIn, Melina Cordero on LinkedIn. That's where I do a lot of activity. I'm always posting a lot of data and insights and articles that hopefully inspire new ways of working. Number two is my website. So melinacordero.com has a lot of my background, my information, things about me and what I do. And then the third is around the P20 platform. It's p20workplace.com. So P and then the number 20 workplace.com, and that will take you straight to the platform that you can explore. And if anybody is interested in any of the work that I do, or thinking about how they can do DEI and leadership differently within their organization, I would encourage you to reach out.
Yeah,
There are lots of things you can do, and the main message I always tell people is little hinges swing big doors.
yeah,
Little tiny steps in the right direction can have huge
fantastic.
impact.
Brilliant. And I'll be sure to include all of that in the show notes. So if you didn't hear what the points of connection from Melina were, we'll have those in the show notes for you to reference and to click on. So Melina, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Mexico City today. I think it's a little bit warmer in your part of the world than it is in our hemisphere. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with somebody else, because that's how we get the word out there and it continues the momentum to allow us to continue creating great content for Power of Women. You can also follow me on the socials on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, or jump onto my website, powerofwomen.com.au, if you've got a suggestion around a topic or a guest that you'd like to put forward. Until next time.